Beautiful.
Thank you. We're back to the live portion of our webcast with Nikki James and Diane D'Aquila. We're here to talk about Caesar and Cleopatra. And I wonder if, to start, Nikki, you might be able to tell us the story from Cleopatra's perspective.
Well, there's this play, you know, you have to take it with what's happening historically, what we think really was happening at this time in Egypt, and then also what happens in our play. So basically, it's a time of strife in Egypt. Cleopatra and her brother are competing for the throne, which they should be reigning jointly, but they're both young and both have sort of advisors who are sort of pulling the strings. And Cleopatra has fled Egypt. And at the same time, Caesar is on his way to Egypt following one of his foes, Pompey, who ends up being killed. So when Caesar finds Cleopatra, she's sort of this young girl who's been dethroned, and he takes her under his wing, which is the first scene. He finds her sort of in the middle of the desert, and they become fast friends, I guess. It's a really strong, they have a strong bond right away. And it's mutually beneficial for both Caesar and Cleopatra that they sort of join forces. For Cleopatra, it's protection, number one, from her brother and her countrymen. And for Caesar, it's a way for him to sort of, by appointing Cleopatra the main ruler in Egypt, he now is putting Egypt under Rome's control. So. So both of them, it's a mutually beneficial sort of relationship. And they have this amazing bond over the course of this play. And over the course of this play, Cleopatra really sort of comes into her own and becomes the woman that most people, when you hear Cleopatra, remember, which is later on towards the end of her reign, which is probably maybe 15 years later than this play takes place. Mm-hmm. So this takes place long before the Asp and long before Mark Antony and, you know, whipping slaves and all those things, the Elizabeth Taylor Cleopatra that people sort of remember. She's a young girl and she really sort of grows up. And I guess the story is that Caesar is her tutor. He's sort of teaching her how to be a woman and how to be a queen.
It's very Pygmalion.
Yeah,
there is a
absolutely.
bit of a Pygmalion going down.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
Actually, Christopher Plummer, my co-star who plays Caesar, said, you know, I always thought Caesar and Cleopatra would be a great musical, and then I realized that they'd made My Fair Lady, which is like, it's sort of the same story. And in the end, Cleopatra doesn't become the woman that Caesar would have hoped that she would become, and
but she grows up.
But she does grow up, and she does become the woman that we remember. Some people think she's ruthless. I disagree, but
no, she's not.
No, I don't think so.
No,
sociopathic maybe.
No, you're not. She is not.
Diane, what role does your character play in all of this?
Well, Shaw, with having done a few Shaw plays, parts tend to, other than the leads, I think they fulfill a function. And Fatata Tita, say that really fast 3 times. Fatata Tita is the nurse to Cleopatra, and I joke about I am the nurse from hell, whereas in Romeo and Juliet with Lucy, she's got the nurse from heaven, the angel nurse. But I'm old Egypt. That's my function. I'm old Egypt that does not want the changes that Rome is going to bring to Egypt, that certainly Caesar is fighting for. Caesar fights for justice. He's not, he doesn't go to war just for the sake of it. His reasons when he does go for war are, in his mind, proper.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It isn't just thrown out for the heck of it. And I resist that. I believe, I do, I whip Cleopatra. They talk about how horrible I am to her in the beginning of the play. But I think it's because it's that Victorian children need to be punished. They need the physical pain to grow up to become stronger. Yep. They should be, you know, seen but not heard. And also, she's my meal ticket.
Absolutely.
It's about survival for Fatata Tita. See, I can't even say it. For Fatata Tita.
Never. Oh, you do say it a lot.
I do say it a lot, but I don't say it with 4 in front of it. For Fatata Tita. The 2 F's will kill you. That she's. So it's also about survival.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Cleopatra doesn't have really any power until Tita, who functions as her nurse, basically her mother, her father, her advisor, her everything. She doesn't know her own strength and power until she can dominate this person who up until this point in her life has been dominating her. It's really sort of interesting, and the switch happens really early on in the play. But the dynamic is, you had a way of treating me, and I then treat you the way you treated me, which is like, actually
you learned too well. Yeah. She learned too well from me.
But then do you go from having this very strong female role model to having a male role model?
Absolutely.
And because he's male, there must be an element of sexuality involved, although I understand that Shaw doesn't really get into that.
Well, Shaw did a couple of things that sort of take away from what we understand, Caesar and Cleopatra in real life did have one child together. They were romantically involved. But historically, Cleopatra was probably closer to 21 or 22 when Caesar arrived in Egypt. In this play, Shaw makes her 16. And so that adds a little element there. And I also think it's not about the sex, although I mean it's sort of there. It's a sort of a flirtatious relationship more than like an overtly, sexual relationship.
But there's a great chemistry between you and Christopher.
Yeah, I think so.
So they're not playing the sex, but there is some. If only he were younger, if only she was older, the chemistry, the two would get together.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
So do we see sexy? Is there that aspect to the play? Are people going to?
Yeah, I mean it's a totally sexy play.
It is a sexy play, but George Bernard Shaw, I mean, it was historically known. His own views about sex were very, I will say the word puritanical. I mean, he was a bit repressed, I think.
So maybe this show was entirely sexy as far as he was concerned,
probably.
even though
probably.
he was trying to overstate it.
When you add the elements of our costumes and lighting and the set design, like it's got, everything about this show sort of has a sexy feel to it.
Well, as we saw in the pre-record, I mean, you do have to wear a body stocking under some of those costumes. They're absolutely gorgeous, but very transparent.
Yay!
We have some questions that have been sent in, so we'll move on to those. Here's one for you, Diane. Is Tita, they're making me say it, a villainess or just devoted to her queen?
I believe she's devoted to her queen. I had this discussion with Des Mackinoff, the director, and he talks about the love that she has. She only shows love for Cleopatra in very few moments in the play, and one could even perhaps play it that there is no love except it comes upon her and surprises Tita. I don't think so. I think everything I do is for love, but it's also balanced with the survival. When you can't afford just to love blindly if you also think that at any moment you could be killed or not be fed or not have a position in society. You have to balance the two.
And also,
so she's not a villain.
Shaw's writing about a completely different society. You can't. I don't think even Cleopatra could be considered to be ruthless, but it's sort of the society which she lives in is very different than in this play Roman society, or even when Shaw was writing, British society.
Oh, absolutely.
The cultural norms and accepted behavior are totally different. So I don't think you can put. Sometimes I think Shaw does put a sort of a judgment edge on it, but I think you can't really speak from that side of the.
And if anything, because Rome is the new age, the new sophistication of civilization that is not archaic, that is not violent, that is more arts minded, more sophisticated, more worldly, and Egypt is more barbaric. There is a character that actually calls the Egyptians barbarians.